Thank you.
All right. Okay, so I guess we can start with the strengths area. So what we're doing is like a strengths, weakness, opportunities, threat analysis. Basically just to get a feel of like the advantages and disadvantages of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we can just start with like what sort of advantages you feel that your organization has in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, so Push has been in the community for about 15 years. So because of that, we have like a standing, if you will. We've established ourselves in the community, particularly in the West Side. So PUSH stands for People United for Sustainable Housing, which essentially means on the day-to-day that, you know, PUSH has really been an advocate for housing and tenant rights and advocacy, as well as ensuring that there's an equitable transition to more, I like to not use the word green because it's, I think, a bit commercialized and detracts from the meaning of what, you know, sustainability really is. But we're really just focused on making sure that people, you know, have access to certain programs to help weatherize, to be more energy efficient, as well as, you know, like I was saying before, ensuring that people's rights as tenants or just residents in general are being, you know, being respected. So that's what that is. And so I'd say our advantage mainly is, you know, our tenure, and having that relationship that goes, you know, back almost 15 years, if not a little bit more, in the community. So people know who we are. That's a big
Definitely.
advantage.
All right. And then, so like, what is like a unique sort of selling proposition of your organization that makes you like a key organization that people would, you know, that would make you more receptive to receiving grants, I guess?
That's a good question. Well, yeah, I guess the safest or easiest way to answer that is we're about an organization, I think, of, I want to say it's shy of 50. So we have about less than 50 employees that work with the organization. We're then split up into different departments and then different teams. So, you know, we might have our tenant advocacy people who, you know, we have a dedicated social worker and a soon to be lawyer / attorney that works specifically on, you know, the tenant advocacy stuff. We have an organizing team that you know, specializes in outreach for civic engagement, voting rights, stuff like that. Sustainability, you know, we work with NYSERDA and other community partners and programs. So like, I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, we're rather small, but we do have a lot of expertise in a lot of areas. And because, well, and I feel a little weird at saying this just because I've only been here 6 months, but I'd like, from what I've gleaned in my short time here relatively, is we have a really diverse set of skills and people that bring a lot of specific things to the table and to the organization. And so that allows, like, I'll use policy and strategy. That's a separate department that we have. I'll use them as an example. So the two people on that team are experts, we will say, in that area. And so that, you know, when the time comes for us to lobby for something, like, for example, PUSH is going to Albany in a couple weeks to help lobby for the CCIA. If you're familiar with that, I think it's the Climate and Community Investment Act. It's something like that. I get them mixed up, but the point being is that, you know, we're going to go lobby for this specific piece of legislation. And so we send our people, our policy and strategy people will be at the forefront of that, but then as well as everyone else from the organization who decides to go is going to go and, you know, offer their piece and their expertise. So I hope that answers your question.
No, yeah, that's perfect. And so it sounds like you have like a really multidisciplinary sort of approach to things.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's a pretty good analysis there. Okay. So I feel like we're good on strengths. We can go to the weaknesses part now. Just I feel like it's such a weird question. Like, what are the weaknesses of your organization? But it's more just like I guess we can call it like, what sort of factors would you say like limit your growth as an organization?
Hmm. Yeah. And I think this is sort of characteristic of a lot of nonprofits, is that we have really good intentions, but it's sort of difficult to really implement a lot of what your intentions are. And that can be for a myriad of reasons. So it can be, you could have limitations logistically, it could be financially. You
Mhm.
can't solve everything just because you're a nonprofit and you say that you want to solve it. And there's a
Right.
thing too called the nonprofit industrial complex, which is a very real thing that I wasn't even aware of until I came here and did some of my own research and deep diving into it. And so I suggest others to do the same thing and just read about it, because it isn't something that can really just be looked at and understood at a face.
Mhm.
Because though nonprofits usually have this rap for being advocates and good-hearted people, which we really usually are, there is bureaucracy still.
Mhm.
We have a lot of a lot of managers that really amazing people, but because they're I don't want to really necessarily say higher up, because there's not so much of a hierarchy here. But they do have inherent responsibilities that sort of prohibit them from being privy to a lot of things. And if they are, it might take some time for us to get an answer back. So yeah, I'd say that's a bit of a complicated one, but yeah, the weaknesses are there in that, again, there's bureaucracy, logistical hurdles and things like that. So
Mhm.
um, yeah,
Okay.
I'd say that that's my answer.
Awesome. Okay. And then, uh, is there any sort of thing that you feel like you could improve on, like in terms of like either like staffing or the way that you guys tackle like financial, I guess, deficits? Um, and it's okay if like your position like doesn't give you the ability to answer that. Like, that's totally fine too.
Um, yeah, I mean, the thing that just comes to face, I think diversifying more is never an issue, and we are not like a blanket organization. So, we don't, everyone is different. Everyone looks different, comes from different places, but that can always be improved. I
Mhm.
think expanding into more demographics, and it doesn't even have to be racial or economic. I think education is important as well, bringing people with different types of education, different backgrounds, so just really going along that line of thinking of just improving, diversity,
Mhm.
that really can't be limited. So I'd say that's a good way to start. And was there a second part to that question?
Kind of like if there's any, let me see, I'll pull it up. So in terms of like the categories, you don't have to touch on all of them, even if just one of them stands out, like programs and services, either staffing, or and then like or technology. Are there any like specific challenges you feel in any of those categories?
Um, yeah, and I guess technology would be where I would go next. The organization has done a lot to, obviously, what's the word I'm thinking of? Not, I guess, adapt is the best word I'm thinking of, just to adapt to COVID.
Mhm.
That has proven a huge hurdle for a lot of people, and organizations and nonprofits have not been exempt from that. And so push has done us a favor and provided us with computers, but it's something that exists, or the issue of technology availability extends beyond the employees as well. It
Okay.
also, I'm concerned about the people in the community who don't have access to these things. And so that makes my job not even harder, but just challenging. Doing outreach and education has been really difficult in a remote framework because
Right.
it's
Yeah,
it's you get a lot more out of seeing someone in person and having the ability to have a dialogue with them and get to know who they are.
definitely.
It's really hard when I'm like, hey, come learn about who I am and what I do via Zoom when you don't even have access to the technology to do
Right.
that, or the knowledge even. So that's definitely been a concern. Not even speaking about the fact that I don't have a printer here at my
Mhm.
house. So like, there's like a lot of different areas and aspects that I guess are just challenged because of COVID, and as well as the fact that we're just in a time where everybody needs more technology just so that
Right.
they can work, go to school, a whole bunch of things. So yeah, I'd say that's
Definitely.
that's probably my best answer.
Awesome. Okay. So now we can do opportunities. So I think the part that I like the most about that is like, are there any sort of organizations that you find like you have like I don't know, like collaborative opportunities with? Um, Something like that.
Yeah. And so push in itself, a huge array of different organizations and partners that extend to every sector that you can imagine. For me specifically, in sustainability, that's something that I'm currently working on. And so, but Buffalo is a really rich place. It's Henshu said, it's like the America's like closet, or he didn't say that. It's like something like that. I don't know. He said something weird, but it's like Buffalo is such a small place. It's like everyone knows everybody. So because of that, in sustainability, I don't necessarily find myself limited in terms of other organizations and opportunities that exist because we all sort of know each other. So whether it's in Waterkeeper, Be Well, uh, I think it's the Climate Alliance. I could be wrong on that,
Mhm.
but there's clean air people too, Sierra Club. And we're all in close proximity. I am going to have an event at Rhinestone Woods in next month in March. So I'd say that, yeah, I specifically have a lot of groups and partners, and I can also lean on not only my organization as a whole, but the people and relationships I've forged in school help too. So yeah, there's
Definitely.
quite a lot of different areas for us to reach out to and collaborate, because really I'd like to think of sustainability as sort of just like it really is a collaborative effort that extends to a lot of different parts of life.
For sure. Thanks. That's a good answer. Um, okay, and then so you work specifically in like sustainability in regards to Push because I know Push is like obviously like equal housing sort of thing as well. Um, but do you think that like the trend, you know how sustainability is sort of like not becoming trendy, but like it's definitely a buzzword for sure.
Yep,
Do
just
you think that like trends sort of like that, and like the sort of I feel like activism has become a little bit of a trend as well. Do you
mhm.
think that that works in favor of your organization,
That's a great question. Um,
or are
yeah,
there any other trends that you think work in favor of your organization as well? Like,
I think so I'll start here. I think the trend of increased advocacy and the concept of equity, equitable transition, we hear that a lot too these
mm,
days. I think that works in our favor because if someone, even if it's deemed a buzzword, if the family down the street who you know is really concerned about just how they're putting food on their table, if they're hearing about these concepts of sustainability, of efficiency, of green, even though I hate that word, it's commercial.
that's
um
lovely.
if they're even just hearing this, despite the fact that they have this, they have the necessity to provide for their family and keep their head above water, I think it'll eventually begin to stick and it'll sort of develop a meaning in whether
For
or
sure.
not they have the the logistics or even the availability or whatever whatever you want to whatever term you want to use, if they are sort of just becoming acquainted with what these things mean over time, I think it'll slowly start to set in. But then it's sort of the role of organizations and just people in general to sort of, we all have a duty to kind of share what we know and our knowledge and, where we are and what we know. And what I mean by that is I'm doing a thing right now that's, we're doing a pilot study that sort of looks at air quality and the relationship between air quality in the home, between emission gas like fossil fuel emissions and subsequent health effects. And data is showing that poorer people and people of color are unfortunately seeing the worst health effects as a result of fossil fuel emissions in the home. And a part of my messaging, given that fact, is I think I would love to see more people of color and people of lower income brackets be involved in these programs, these green programs, because there is an inherent benefit to that. Not only are they can see increases in public health and just overall general health, but there's also the opportunity for them to be part of the equitable transition, because New York, as we may know, is on track to becoming 100% net zero by 2050. So by, spreading the word and going along those, like we were saying, those terms that are sort of just like phrases, and, just, they may not necessarily have any sort of concrete definition or meaning. If we're just talking about these things and getting people the knowledge and the, equipping themselves with these tools, then they can sort of start to make these transitions and move forward for themselves. And that's really what it's about. It's about providing people with things and knowledge and tools so that they can help themselves. We're not here to solve every problem in the world. We're just trying to help people get there, really, is what it is. Because we logistically can't fix everything.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. So now we can do threats. So have you noticed, or do you think that it's possible that changing policies or changing social context has like challenged your service area like in any way?
I've only been here 6 months, so I can't speak on how things were even at, given under the prior administration. I'll leave it at that. So there is that, but I do understand. I mean, I do have the benefit of having been a poli-sci student in my undergrad, so I can say that policy and law does influence a lot of what we're doing. Obviously, the CLCPA was a tremendous win for not only climate advocates and sustainability advocates, but I think I'm sort of biased, obviously, but I think for everybody. So, that's a great example of how policy has really been progressive and helped thrust forward, at least our agenda as sustainable professionals. It could also, be in the adverse. So something could pop up hypothetically that could, sort of limit funding or limit our opportunities, whether it be through policy or through law. So yeah, we're definitely not exempt from public law and policy just because we are a nonprofit. I sort of think to a degree we're just as susceptible to these to changes as a lot of other organizations. We are grant funded,
Right.
The state of New York is sort of the person or the entity that fronts a lot of what we're doing, because we are working to implement the CLCPA. At least that's what I do.
Right. And then, okay. So like, obviously, like as a organization, like you have like obstacles that because you're trying to create more sustainable housing and get people into more, like not to call it green, but like more green infrastructure in the city of Buffalo. So what are there any like specific obstacles that you guys like consistently run into?
COVID is obviously something that's still dynamic. Like just you never want to be too lenient with that, too safe.
Mhm.
So we're constantly it's a tug of war. It's constantly going back and forth with, is now the right time to get out and have something in person while still respecting social distancing?
Right,
You know, because I think we're all sort of in a burnout phase with webinars and online events.
for
So,
sure.
that's certainly a concern. I'd also say that going along that vein, and like I touched on previously, it's sort of hard to get people to worry about some of our initiatives like electrification, weatherization, when people are still concerned about the pandemic, when people are still concerned about work.
Mhm.
Finances are a big concern these days, and so
Definitely.
we're trying to find, I think a lot of people, but myself included here, are trying to navigate and also adapt and figure out how we can help people in these dark times, but also still sort of provide them with knowledge on a lot of what our core values and mission is, and objectives are.
Mhm.
So it's just like it's a process is really what it is. I'm still learning.
Definitely.
I'm not anywhere near an expert. Um, I'm constantly taking away from what I learn from the community, what I learn from my coworkers and peers, what I learn from experts, from literature, so it's all about just sort of bringing that together so that you can synthesize it and become a better leader is really what it is.
For sure. Um, um, okay, so that pretty much gets that. There's one more question that I was gonna ask. Mhm. Oh, are there any like specific areas, whether it's like within your department of push or others, that you think grant funding is like specifically beneficial for? Like, because I feel like you can fund certain things with other financial, I don't know, there's other funders besides grant funding,
Mhm.
but is there anything that grant funding specifically stands out for?
uh there definitely is. To be honest and completely transparent, I don't really necessarily know, just because my manager and the higher ups, we'll call them, sort of deal with that stuff more. But I am aware that grant funding, at least with the Clean Heat initiative, the Clean Heat campaign, that's an NYSERDA grant funded thing. So NYSERDA, well, actually, no, I lied to you. There is something that I can answer. So yeah, for example, NYSERDA will, just throwing my pen at my computer. NYSERDA will provide and does provide grant funding for a lot of electrification services and weatherization. So, um, and that helps because a lot of these programs or a lot of these technologies and initiatives cost money that people don't have. And so I think, that's where grant funding really comes and help, or becomes helpful and beneficial when we have a house, let's say, Joe Schmo lives in a really energy insufficient house, inefficient house, and it needs some weatherization work done, and then also wants to electrify. This could be like it could be like over a $10,000 project. It could be
Mhm.
anywhere up to $30,000. And we all know how difficult financials have been in the past 2 years, with especially COVID. And
Mhm.
so as a state, as the state has these goals and and outlines how to do these transitions, it's important to provide adequate funding and at least incentives to people so that they can help move the agenda forward, if you will.
Definitely. Hmm. And then, okay, this is like the last question. It's kind of open-ended, so it's okay if you don't have like a specific place for it. But I'm just, the last one would be, uh, where like the most important unmet need exists like within your organization. Like what is the like most important thing that you guys are like trying to fix, I guess, like within the organization?
Like, what is, can you rephrase that?
Yeah, okay. So like usually when you're seeking funding, like grant funding, you're trying to meet like a very specific need that you're trying to fund something for. So where, I don't know, like where does the need exist the most, I guess, within your organization? Like what requires the most of your attention and the most of your finances?
I feel like there is a specific answer to that question that I may not necessarily actually have the context to provide you with.
No
So
worries.
forgive me for that.
No, you're
But
fine.
I think that I feel like a lot of what we do is really important and
Mhm.
garners or should garner attention and funding. Because though I don't necessarily like to say this, money sort of does rule the world.
Mhm.
um, you can't do anything without, I guess, the wherewithal to do it.
For
Um,
sure.
so, yeah, I'd say just a lot of what we do isn't really in vain. And so I'm a big proponent for increased funding to nonprofits because though there is the tendency and there can be uh, abuse in that regard, like I don't want to say that nonprofits are angels, but if we were to provide more funding to nonprofits and organizations who have had long-standing roots in the community like Push has, I would
Mhm.
assume that we would be able to be a lot more helpful to the community and could expand our sphere of influence and do a lot of the things that we've talked about before. So increasing diversity in the workforce, providing people with more access to programs and incentives, education and outreach. These things could certainly be made, I guess, like on at face easier through increased funding. And
Yeah.
so unfortunately but we'd have to make do with what we have. And so that has certainly been at least a minor hurdle, if you will.
No, that definitely answers that because I think we touched on it a lot in some of the earlier questions about like where exactly the unmet need lies. So with that, I think I'll probably stop recording now because I feel satisfied with what we've got here. So let me just